All this technology.
Yay, I think we are live.
Cool. Let's see.
Yep, we're live on Facebook.
Oh, let me approve. Oh, good thing I did that. Okay. Alrighty.
Oh, hi, everyone. Can y'all see us? Yay. This is kind of cool. I like this.
Are you looking at yourself on Facebook at the same time?
I am. I am.
Hey. Cool. Well,
so it's going to be the three of us on Zoom?
Yes.
Yep.
Oh.
And then actually share.
Awesome.
Okay. Let's get started then, I guess.
Great. I'm going to share on my desktop as well. Facebook is so complicated. And then I'm going to share in the AAC group as a watch party. Top watch party. Yay! Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Art Accordingly Live. This is a very, very special episode because we haven't been here since, what, May, I think? That's the last time we recorded?
Yeah. Lots happened since May.
Right, our whole life has happened since May. So welcome. I do see people who are actually in the webinar. So welcome to the folks in the webinar. Welcome to the folks who are watching us broadcasting on Facebook Live. I'm Quanice Floyd, founder and director of Arts Administrators of Color Network. And this is Art Accordingly. Josh, you want to?
Sure. I'm Josh Jenkins. I am the board chair of the Arts Administrators of Color Network, amongst some other things, but that's how I'm showing up today. So hi, everybody. I'm drinking some rosé, so don't mind me.
And as always with Art Accordingly Live, we have a special guest. We have Cicie Sattarnilasskorn. Hey, Cece, welcome.
Hello.
Awesome. So Cece will be joining us today and giving amazing commentary and talking shit with us along the way. Awesome. So before we get started, we always start Art Accordingly with a land acknowledgement. So we want to make sure that we are paving the way for our ancestors who helped us be here during this moment. Josh, did you want to go through the land acknowledgement?
I don't have it on me. Do you have it on you? Oh, shit.
Oh, okay.
Let me grab it. Hold on.
Okay.
Alrighty. I'm going to use this one. As we gather in this digital realm, we must find ways to resist and dismantle the colonization of this space. We must address and change inequitable access to technology and high-speed internet and be cognizant of environmental and labor injustices embedded in the making and distribution of digital technologies. Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by extractive industries who mine and pollute lands and water without regard to health or sovereignty. Indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by climate change, hastened by industries that make and supply the devices we are using right now, and that many of us use in our artistic practices every day. Let us acknowledge our responsibility to each other, to the land that we occupy, and make the reparations needed. Let us also consider our own commitments to decolonization, liberation, and accompliship and allyship in every space, including this digital one.
Awesome, that's beautiful. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm based in Washington, D.C., which is the land of the Nacotchtank, the Piscataway, and the Pamunkey tribes. So we celebrate and honor those ancestors, past, present, and future. Just to give you all a little bit of the structure of Art Accordingly Live. First off, you got to have your drink. So get your drinks, because this is brunch. It's 1:30 Eastern time, so get your drink. I got cranberry and vodka, just in case y'all wanted to know. So I'm going to get
nighttime drink over there, Quanice.
So probably in about 20 minutes, I start slurring my words a little bit, talking a little bit more shit. But we'll start off with a DEI or Die segment. So that's us talking about different topics that's currently happening. There's so much that's happening over the past, 6 months since we last broadcasted. And then we're going to do our interview with Cece, who we're really excited about. And then Know Better, Do Better, which is an opportunity for us to call out the bullshit that's happening in the field. And then Let's Get Liberated, which is a call to action for all of us to come together in liberation with one another.
Cool. Oh, and well, let me say, if this is your first time joining us for Art Accordingly, thanks for coming and listening. Quanice and I started Art Accordingly after we, way long ago now, when we were doing this art equity facilitation training together in LA, and we came back knowing we were both in DC. And we were like, we should do a podcast and do all the things. And that's led us on this fun journey of interviewing lots and lots of really awesome people and showing up at lots of different conferences to do that as well, across discipline and practice and all that kind of stuff. So you can find all of the old episodes on any of the platforms that you listen to podcasts. We're doing this sort of a special session here, but we're also gearing up for another like actual season of things with recorded podcast episodes that should start at some point, you know, when we can in the fall.
Awesome. Josh, do you want to get started with your DEI or die?
Sure. So should I share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna just, give it a go. So my DEI or die is, let's do this. Hope you all can see that. So my DEI or die is actually coming from the theater community. The Asian American Performers Action Coalition just recently released their visibility report around racial representation on New York City theater stages. And so it looks specifically at the 2017-2018 season, which I think is an important sort of thing to note. Not that that makes it any better, and I'm pretty sure that in 1920, we're looking at the same sort of numbers here, but they analyzed the 18 largest nonprofit theaters as well as Broadway companies in New York City during that 17-18 season. And what they found was really quite disappointing. Out of nearly 80% of all the Broadway and off-Broadway shows were their writers were white, and 85.5% of the directors were white. In addition, 14.4% of directors were identifying as BIPOC. Of the writers, 20.9% of those writers identified as BIPOC. If you don't know, when we say BIPOC, we mean Black, Indigenous, or person of color. Over half of all shows written by BIPOC writers were actually directed by white directors. And only 20% of the actual roles that were casted were filled by BIPOC actors. In addition, the report also found that nonprofit theaters for which contractual minimum salaries are based on revenue earned at different size venues spent $1.70 on white actors for every $1 that was spent on an actor of color. So the reason I float this is because obviously it's like awful, but I do think it's really important when we talk about research. Sometimes research is being weaponized, I think, against communities of color. I think this is a really timely and important moment for groups like the Asian American Performers Action Coalition to bring forth research that pushes and challenges and keeps us on a track towards equity and towards greater access and inclusion, especially within the disciplines, within specific disciplines. So I'm really glad that this actually is very specific in its approach. It looks specifically at theater in New York, Broadway and off-Broadway, because it sort of plays in tandem almost with the We See You American Theater, White American Theater movement that's also happening. So I think it reiterates really awful things for me, but it also, I think, underscores the importance of continuing to hold people accountable for their stuff and doing it with data. and saying that we actually are sitting here. This isn't a feeling anymore. This isn't a sort of observation. This is actual statistical data that says that in 2017 and 18, Broadway looked really, really white per usual. So like, how are we changing that, and how are we moving the field forward is a really sort of, I would say it's easier to do when you're armed with data that holds people accountable in the end. So I just thought it was really interesting, and I really want to amplify that particular coalition because it's a really like dense study. I think it's 90 plus pages. So it's important, I think, for us to sort of circulate that and read that as we can. And it's done annually. So I really just want to highlight and amplify the work of that group and what they were able to accomplish, even in the midst of a pandemic, because now it's really important to sort of know what's going on. So yeah, especially as Broadway shut down and all these other places are shut down. So.
Awesome. So I guess my follow-up to this, I'm really interested in this survey. So I'm going to probably read a little bit deeper into it because I know it's 90 pages long, but I'm really glad that it came out. I wasn't aware of the survey prior to this year, so I'm definitely going to keep looking at the research over the past couple of years. But I think this is a pivotal time for the arts, especially, now that folks started putting out, especially Broadway, they started putting out these, Black Lives Matter statements and, calls for liberation and all this other stuff. And now we have this data to be like, oh, you said this back in June after the George Floyd incident. Now you need to do what you need to do, right? Like stop talking about it and let's be about it. So I'm really excited at the fact that we can use that. We can weaponize that against them. They've been using data to weaponize people of color for centuries. So now we can weaponize that against them, hold them accountable. But at the same time, it's like, we know that shit wasn't changing. We knew that shit was white, pure white. Like, even if you're like in the theater, I don't know if you're in the theater folks of color Facebook group, but they talk about it all the time, that it's, it's really difficult for artists of color, screenwriters of color, producers of color to even just break through the glass ceiling that's there. So I'm really excited because then we can talk all the shit to folks.
Right. And with the, what's interesting is the We See You White American Theater movement was really going heavy on the anecdotes and sort of these anonymous like stories of really awful things happening to people. So I think that's also kind of why it works well together, because data is one thing, and some people really process and hear things clearly when they look at data. Some folks like myself don't always like want numbers. I want to hear stories. And so I think when we put both of those kinds of tools together, that's when you really have a greater impact, because folks are taking what they need from where they need it, as opposed to waiting to be compelled only by a story or only by a data point. So, yeah.
Awesome. Cece, do you have any thoughts around that?
I mean, it's kind of like tale as old as time, right? Like, it does sort of dovetail a little bit into my article. Should I just jump in?
Yeah, jump right in.
So also in New York, so I'll talk about this later, but I'm an art historian by training. So a lot of my interest and experiences are in the sort of art museum gallery world. And I follow, every day I try to read Art Daily newspaper. And there was an article that struck me a few days ago about a dealer, a big time New York gallery dealer, David Zwerner, who hired a Black woman, Ebony L. Haynes, as the director of a new exhibition space and commercial gallery in Manhattan, for which she plans to employ an all-Black staff. And the article is pretty short, but at first it talks about he had reached out to her about being one of the gallery directors. So Zwerner Gallery is a big time art gallery in Chelsea where all the art galleries are. He has 4 offices. So I think there's 2 in New York, and then there's London, Paris, and Hong Kong, which is kind of like the normal places where you have these like big time contemporary galleries. And each gallery has like a director, and the ones in New York have several. So he had, I think, approached Ms. Haynes to be a gallery director. And after conversation and sort of her talking to her and it doesn't go into detail what they talked about, but basically it was decided that there would be a new space created for her to amplify or highlight Black artists and have an all Black staff. And she made a really good point about how front of house, like all the artists, like if you look at the stable of artists in the gallery, it's pretty diverse. But in back of house, of course, it's not at all. And so I did a little bit of research because on the surface, like in the article, it sounds really exciting. I mean, it picked up in Art Daily, it was in the New York Times, it was in all the kind of contemporary art press, but there's no mention of it on the gallery's actual site. She was supposed to start October 1st. You'd think this was like a big deal, you know, especially in this climate. So it's very vague about what it's going to be, where it's going to be. It's a space that's as yet to be built. So I thought that was a little bit odd. Like part of me, it's kind of a wait and see. Like, is this sort of performative because of right now and in the time? Like it's kind of something that's really important, but how is it actually going to pan out? Because I thought it was odd that she's not listed anywhere on the website, and that's where people would go if they're looking for information about this gallery. There's no listing of staff, there's no listing of even this as a thing that's forthcoming. It feels a little bit like separate but equal kind of thing, where it's like we're doing something great, but we're not going to put it out front and center in our website. It's just going to get kind of press in these big journals or these big media platforms, but it'll be interesting to see. I'm hopeful, but also wary.
Yeah, that's also like, it makes me wonder, and I'm not saying that this is what they did, but I think we're seeing people reacting to their like, oh, we've done something good, let's push it out really, really quickly, and like let's make sure the whole world knows that we're not awful
Right.
or something. And so like before they've actually figured out what the plan is or actualized it, or you know, put the wheels in motion in a way where they can actually share what the work is going to be and how it will unfold. And so I think we're seeing that a lot with a lot of hiring sort of things, as people are really excited about like hiring people of color. But you don't really hear anything else about like what that means for the organization or how that trickles down into sort of like a systemic change within the organization and those kinds of things. We hear about the hire. And so, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, like a person was hired to run a building that hasn't been built in a space that has yet to be identified, to support like Black staff and artists who have also, I mean, I guess maybe with staffing, but like with artists who haven't been, like there's no criteria, there wasn't like, it's more just like, how is this woman gonna make this happen? She has the backing of this gallerist. And maybe, I mean, maybe it will be something significant, but it just seemed odd to not have it anywhere else other than in the media.
Right. Yeah, I'm hesitant. I'm always kind of hesitant about that, because even like that tokenism is, to me, is blatant when it comes to this story.
Right.
And so I've seen it a lot where they'll hire a person of color, or specifically they'll hire a Black woman, and then they will make that shit a living hell for her, right? Like, and I don't know if you ever seen that graphic where it's like the cycle of Black women in a nonprofit, and it's like you got the hire, and then she starts calling out the shit, and then people tell her she's aggressive, and then like it just like goes over, and then eventually she leaves the nonprofit. So I do hope they're a little bit more intentional. I do hope they're genuine. I do hope that she is protected, because you know we always got to send positive spirits to folks who are in those types of positions, because they know they're being tokenized in a way, but then also they're trying to make change. And so when you start speaking up, especially as a Black woman, you're often told all types of craziness, right? Like they don't believe you, you're making things up, it's all in your head. Like it's all of that rhetoric that they send back to that woman. So I do hope that we can be some type of like support system, or she does have her own support system, or some type of barrier that can help protect her during that time, because it doesn't seem like they have a plan.
And it kind of goes, I think we've said this before on the podcast, and that like a lot of this sort of wonderful hiring that's happening, folks are not going and supported, or the systems aren't ready to support what they're like, the specific and unique needs of those folks to be able to thrive and succeed. And then they're being critiqued from the same, if not harsher lens. And it's like, well, why couldn't you bring success in this way? And it's like, well, I was sort of never set up to be successful other than being hired as your first person of color to do X, Y, and Z. So it's like a tread cautiously kind of thing, you know? So.
Cool. So I guess my article is about the Guggenheim. The Guggenheim has been in some shit over the past year. So was it last year where they had Black curator, and then they had the event without her, and then their workers unionized against them, and then it was some other bullshit that happened. So now we're back with the Guggenheim again, because they're always on some shit. So most recently, I'm going to share my screen as well, if I know how to share it. Yeah, I do. So most recently, I think this is actually a trend that's happening with most museums, right? Like they're getting ready to reopen after being closed for 5-6 months for COVID. And the first people who are out there on the front lines of those museums are typically BIPOC folks. And so they realized, like the artists and the activists in the communities realized that, you know, you are exploiting these people, you're underpaying them, they're risking their lives, they could potentially be getting the virus, you don't have the support system to help them with their health insurance, like all of that. And so the artists came together and they projected a whole bunch of crazy shit on the side of the Guggenheim, and it cracks me up. Look at this. Seeking new management, and then you got trustees, the workers drop dead. Like, they went in on their asses. Open for racism, open for exploitation. Like, they projected this on there. And my concern is a lot of these museums are actually doing that. Like, they're so excited to reopen, so excited to have visitors, so excited to bring folks in, but they're still risking people's lives at the same time, and they don't really care about that, right? Like, most executive directors are working from home. Yeah. Most, they're on their computer working from home, but then you have the security guards, you have the installers of the art, whatever exhibit's happening. Like, there's just no empathy, no consideration for those folks, whether it comes to pay, whether that they should be getting hazard pay. Like, this is a pandemic, a global pandemic. There's no reason why you're still getting paid $15.50. Like, that doesn't make sense. They should be getting hazard pay. They should have top-notch presidential health insurance. They should be whisked away at Walter Reed, just like Trump was whisked away a couple of days ago. Like, they should have access to all of that. And so I'm just kind of really concerned, because months ago, these same organizations were the ones, like I said, who put out these Black Lives Matter statements, who put out these calls for liberation, who said that they wanted to do better, and they're still doing the same shit over and over again. So that makes me kind of like hesitant in believing any organization at this point in time, because I need to see change. And if y'all is open for racism, then that means you ain't changing. So yeah, that's my article.
I mean, I just want to say your tabs give me so much anxiety.
Oh,
Why are there so many?
I don't forget.
I had to, I'm joking, but still.
No, I was going to come back. I was thinking the same thing, but I didn't want to say.
Stop it. Don't judge me.
No
judgment. No, I think that's a great article, just because I think it's bigger than just the Guggenheim. I mean, like, it's weird. I get the urgency behind wanting to move to open for folks. I get that, like, folks want to be able to survive and bring something in so they can keep the doors open long enough to see us through the whatever's on the end of a pandemic and back to some whatever kind of normalcy. But I don't know. I just think that at the end of the day, when you're putting people on the front lines and expecting them to operate business as usual and not compensating for the severe risk that you're putting them in, I just feel like that's already kind of enough reason for me to be like, let's keep it closed. But I mean, good for them. Protect those artists, because Lord knows they out there doing some really important stuff and challenging people in a way that needs to be challenged. But I hope that, I mean, what did it say, like how long they were doing that for? Like, is that an ongoing thing, or was it just like a night of?
So they did it on September 28th, but I think it might be ongoing.
Good for them.
Yeah, but it also brings a weird intersection conversation in for me, because when COVID first happened, everybody shut the fuck down. The first people who got furloughed were people in positions who are like entry level or like frontline positions. So like most of the Black and brown folks, for example, got furloughed. They were the first ones out. But now that they're opening up, now they're the first ones back in. And it's just like, it just blows my mind. It's like, I don't know. They're just using people at some point. Like, you have to say, do you really care about your employees? Do you care about your staff? If so, how are you taking care of them?
We shall see what happens. Are they open?
They opened October 1st, I believe. Yeah.
We'll see if that carries. I mean, this is the other thing I don't think people are ready for, is that like, we could be in another wave of something. We could be in another like, and so this time really should have been like head to the ground. How do we survive if this lasts forever? And so I think if the end goal was always opening back up the doors, then what do you do, and how do you set yourself up for success? If over the winter we have a whole nother surge that requires everybody to close their doors again, are the same people who you just sent back out into the front lines, are those also again the same ones that come back out when it's time to when we have to buckle down and do something again? So I don't know, it just feels like there's, not to say there's too much optimism about what's coming, but like, God, like we're just in the middle of what feels like something that's going to be like long term, or like we will feel the long term for so long. So that's a little discouraging.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like that's a nonprofit industrial complex, right? Like, it's playing into that. We have to shut down, so now we don't have no money. Now, you know, it's scarcity. It's a scarcity mindset. Like, we have to make sure that we're bringing in income. Like, capitalism is all over this shit. And so it's like, one, it's really not scarcity. Like, I feel like there's so much happening, and during this time, like especially with AAC and the work that we're doing, we've been getting flooded with resources from folks. So I don't know why we're still kind of playing that, oh, there's no money, there's nothing left game. Because every time I see it, I call it out. I'm like, we AAC started off with nothing. And we don't necessarily approach things with a scarcity model. Shit just happens, right? It manifested in its own way, which I find really fascinating too. That's a whole different case study. But just thinking about like, stop thinking that we need to open. You need to think about people first. And organizations are not thinking people first. They're thinking money first. So yeah, there's that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So now we're going into our interview with Cece. Woo! So I'm excited to have Cece here. Cece and I are both served.
Oh, way back.
Yeah, we go way back. And we both serve on the DC Commission of the Arts and Humanities. Cece.
We can talk about that later.
We're going to talk about that, incorporated it. And Cece is the treasurer for the commission. And so Cece is also an art historian, which she said earlier, but we're just so happy to finally have you. Cece, we've been talking about this probably for a year.
Yes, thank you. I've been asking. I guess rule number one, if you want to do something, ask, because I've been asking.
Awesome. So just to get started, can you just tell us what was your journey in the arts? How did you get started? You know, what led to your passion to being an arts historian and arts administrator?
Sure. I've always loved the arts. I think I was told from a young age that I loved art. I also recognize, sort of looking back, how fortunate I was as a young person to be exposed to the arts. You don't really appreciate the privileges that you have until you recognize that not everybody has them. So I went to an elementary school where we had field trips to the museum. And I remember going as a young kid to museums, loving it, loving just the experience of seeing art. The whole, I feel like there's a very kind of ritualistic process. Like, you go in and you're quiet and there's this air of reverence. Um, you have to conduct yourself in a certain way. You know, as a young person, you don't really, you don't always get to see that. So, and my parents were really encouraging. Like, I know I went to shows, Broadway shows and plays. And so as long as I could remember, I was exposed to the arts, did music classes. I probably have a very typical sort of immigrant Asian child experience. Like, I took piano lessons and music lessons and all of that. Um, as far as the journey to it being a career, I went to a high school that had, I went to this very fancy private LA school in LA, all girls school. It's called Marlboro, and it was an amazing place. And I had so many opportunities, and one of the opportunities was juniors and seniors would be placed in internships. So there was an actual internship lady, Ms. Brown, and you would go in and you would say what career you might be interested in, and she would tap the extensive kind of alumni parent network and get students placed into these internships, which, you know, again, at the time it felt very normal for this school, but looking back, it's like, that's not normal for a lot of high school kids. And so I'm so grateful that my parents sacrificed so much for me to go to this school. So my junior year, summer after junior year, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I got an internship at a law firm and quickly realized I did not want to be a lawyer, was actively discouraged by staffers there. They're like, you don't want to be a lawyer. But it was a good experience. I mean, I spent the summer in a office, like, going through papers. It was not remotely interesting. Um, so then senior year, I took an art history class, and it was very eye-opening. I loved it. And then senior year, I graduated and I wanted to work in a museum, and got this amazing opportunity to intern at LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, again through school. And it was just such an incredible experience. I also spent days locked in a windowless room, but instead of paperwork, it was, artifacts and ancient Chinese. I worked in the Far Eastern art department, and they were redoing the entire gallery. So throughout the summer, I got to see kind of an exhibition space develop from beginning to end. Like, the first day I was there was just like empty walls. And then when I left, my last day, they were getting ready to open, and I took my mom, and it was really exciting. It was like the first time I realized, oh, people work in museums and have jobs and, you know, can make a living. That was sort of not something that registered. Like, lawyer made sense, doctor, but, curator, what's a curator, and all of that. So, but again, like typical, I think parents want you to do something practical, something that's stable. And so majoring in art history was not something that my parents were really encouraging me. They were like, you can take some art classes. So I went to school at Tufts in Boston, right outside of Boston. And I was going to do something practical, like economics or international relations, something. It's a liberal arts school, so it was something, more practical. But then the year after freshman year, summer after freshman year, my mom got sick. I took a year off from school, and she passed away from cancer about a year after. And I was 19 at the time. So it's kind of like a very interesting time in your life anyway. And my dad, I'm an only child, so my dad and I, like, we had spent a year with her through that process. And then afterwards he was like, this was the beginning of the summer, so it was May. And he's like, all right, you have the summer, we're gonna spend the summer together, and then you're going back to school. And I told him, I'm not gonna do economics or international relations or whatever. I'm gonna do art history. And he's like, okay. Like, he's like, just because I, you know, your life changes dramatically, and you're like, life is short. My mom just died. I'm like, I'm not spending it doing something that I don't absolutely love. So I changed my major. And that was kind of it. Like, I'm one of those art history majors that actually used my degree. I became an art person. I knew I was going to go to graduate school. I had an amazing advisor who just was very honest with me. And he said, you can do this, but it's going to be hard. It's not lucrative. People don't do it for the money. Um, you know, he's like, you can marry rich. Like, I think at the time it was, you know, the feminist in me was a little, and my friends were like appalled by by that advice, but it was true. Like, that's how you, it was honest. I think I really appreciated the honesty, and the reality. And it's what I tell people now. Like, I've had tremendous job satisfaction. um it's a privilege to do what you love, but it's not, it's not an immediate moneymaker. Although now I can say, you know, I think, you know, Quanice and I at the convening, it's like, nonprofit is not no profit. So I think there is a little bit changing of that dynamic, especially learning how to advocate for yourself and knowing your value. So, but yeah, that's how I started. I went to grad school at GW. That's how I ended up in DC. Um, and I worked in a variety of different arts organizations. I was at the Hirshhorn for a little while. I'm definitely a museum head. Like, I worked in galleries. I worked at Glenstone. I had a brief stint at the museum. My first sort of professional internship was at a house museum, a historic house museum in Boston. I loved that. I love sort of just historic sites. And then the arts admin kind of happened by accident. You know, the recession happened in 08, 09. Lost my museum job. Like, a lot of people, arts are always the first to go, last to come back. So laid off. Worked for an accountant for 2 years. Very, very educational, very eye-opening. Thought for a hot second, oh, I should just be an accountant, because again, it's stable, it's recession proof. But when you have like a deep passion, you can't let it go. Like, even when there's just no jobs happening. So I, you know, economy rebounded, and then I found myself working at a nonprofit in an administrative role, and that's kind of where I've been. And in the interim, when I was working, I became involved in the commission, first as a grant reviewer, and then as a commissioner, where I met Quanice, and that's a whole other experience. So that's kind of where I am now. And then I think people might have in the beginning seen a little head moving around. So lately I took a step back. I've taken a step back professionally. I'm trying to get back into it, but I've been raising a now toddler. And also, I mean, I think that's it's also been part of the journey. I came to the marriage baby game pretty late, and so that's all been part of the art journey as well. I wanted to get to a point in my career that I could actually take ownership and control over my time and my career to make some of these decisions. And so it's been an interesting journey, but I wouldn't have traded it.
Not to like force you all to go into the sort of commissioner land, but I am curious. what you're working on now, or like what are you sort of tackling? And I think it's important to also, maybe if this is an opportunity for either you or Quanice to sort of talk about what the role of a commissioner is, because I think that some folks might think they know what that means, but what does that actually mean, and how is that work really important? Because it is really, 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 as we've seen in DC, it's very important. Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of it's a great question, because I think if you asked all 18 commissioners, you might get different answers about what the role of the commission is. But as I understand it, so um, the commission is the granting organization, the granting body of the city for the arts. So a portion of the DC budget writ large is set aside for the arts, and the commission is the agency. The commission is the agency that distributes the funds. So there's an executive director and a staff. And then there's a group of commissioners who are appointed by the mayor and approved by city council to oversee this agency. And the chair of the commission is also appointed by the mayor. And I would say up until about, like 18 months ago, the agency was under the Department of DemPed. So economic development, under that, what is the position called? Deputy Mayor's Office of Economic Development, excuse me. So the mayor has sort of a number of deputy mayors, and the Arts Commission sat under one of them. So our budget and everything was sort of overseen by the Office of the Mayor. We have since become independent, I use in quotes, independent of the Deputy Mayor's Office, and we supposedly function as an independent body. I use the asterisk or in quotes because the mayor still oversees our budget, and the mayor still determines our budget, excuse me, and still names the chair. And other people still determine who's on the commission. And there are no term limits. There's kind of a lot of systemic issues that are applicable to nonprofits in general that are applied here, in my opinion. But yeah, essentially that's what we do. We are an independent body of 18 people. We have to live in the district, so 18 DC residents with a variety of different arts experiences. I think what Quanice and I have realized, and this may or may not surprise people, but we, I think, are currently just there's only about 2 or 3 of us who are working, or commissioners, excuse me, I should say, who have day jobs. So much like a lot of nonprofits, there are people on the board who their experience with the arts falls under more of the category of like benefactor or donor, and less people who have actual experience working in the arts. And we come up against that kind of mentality quite a bit. And yeah, the agency has a number of different granting categories. They are peer reviewed, so people apply to the grants categories. There's individual fellowships, there's facilities, there's general operating. The one good thing is that we are one of the agencies that provides general operating funds. Like, they're not tied to a project, they're not tied to anything. It's just to support organizations, which is, I think, a really important part of the mission. And there's a panel review process, and then we as the commissioners vote. And that's kind of the process. I guess I was going to bring this. One of the things that in light of everything that's happened, there's been an equity task force and diversity. Quanice sits on the committee that was put together. But we certainly have some concerns because it feels a little bit like you were saying earlier about there's a rush to do that, to get to that, but are they ready to do the work or to really make substantive change? And there was a survey that went out, and we had people in the community reach out and say, like, there's problems with this survey in and of itself. You know, like, data is only as good as the questions you ask. And so if you're not asking the right questions, if you're not asking, if you're not including the right communities that need to be addressed, like, there were a lot of people left out, I think. And so that's something we've been trying to work against. Like, a lot of people are not included in the DC Commission. We have a lot more artists than we currently serve, and I think some of us are trying to find ways to broaden that umbrella, widen that.
You said that very nicely. So if you want to know, Cece's being very nice. So I'll take the heat for this.
Well, I do want to say, I was very wary of any diversity inclusion task force that did not include Quanice in the first go around, the first pass. So Quanice was kind of not initially on the committee, and I was shocked because this is her life's work. And I'm like, if you're really serious about this and you have someone on the board who is an expert, she needs to be on the committee. And she wasn't initially, and only because a number of us were like, you need to be on this committee. But I mean, she has a sixth sense about this, about whether people are actually true to what they're trying to do or whether they're just trying to do it. And, you know, Quanice is busy and she's not gonna waste her time. And so I'll let you, but it was, the first red flag for me was that they didn't immediately look to her to help guide or drive this effort. And I know that there are other people on the committee for whom this is also their work. And so maybe, I don't know, but I was wary. I still am.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take away from your interview. So I'll just say this. The question you asked, Josh, there is what the DC Commission does, and then there's what other commissions do. Right. And so what Cece described is what the DC Commission does, but other commissions do a lot more. And they try to do a lot more, and they advocate for their artists and they advocate for arts organizations a lot better. But she was very nice in saying that there's only a few of us with jobs. There's old white women on the commission, straight point. Wealthy white women connected to political candidates who have that in. They're in the in crowd. They're the socialites of DC. And so a lot of the work that they often do, this is a barrier, is that they have meetings during the day, they have grant panels during the day, they're not paying grant panelists. You know, I'm a part of the Arts Education Committee. They have the committee at 10 o'clock in the morning. I work from 9 to 5. I'm an executive director, so I really work from 8 to 9. So it's just like, it's so many socioeconomic barriers that are within the DC Commission that is just really, really frustrating. So yes, I just wanted to kind of translate that. And then with the equity committee, Cece is correct. I wasn't included in the first go around. And so there has been a lot of hesitation, and there's been a lot of exclusiveness, and there's a lot of politics that's being played. And I don't necessarily like it. Like, I try to call it out, but after a while I'm like, I'm gonna stop fucking calling this out. I'm just either not gonna show up, or I'm just gonna be there, and then I'm gonna do what I need to do behind the scenes, where I need to support the folks that I need to support on my own terms. Because, I mean, old white wealthy women are often barriers to us actually getting the work done all the time, because they have nothing else to do. They're just there. They're housewives. Imagine like housewives of all of the housewives of DC. They're not there. They have ladies who lunch. So they go to lunch together. They drink champagne. They go to fundraisers for political candidates. They talk shit about things. And then they just cackle. It's just a lot of busy work for them. And then people like me and Cece are truly like advocates, and we really do this work. They just get in the way of that shit. So,
you know, this is really specific, but I always wonder, because I've served on grant panels a couple of times in a couple of different places. And at first I thought it was just DC, but like I did a panel recently for like Miami. And it was all like during the day. It was all like, I get a volunteer day, luckily, through my my job. So I end up always reserving the volunteer day that I know I'm gonna have, because I know I'll eventually be on some kind of grant panel somewhere, usually throughout the year, and I'll reserve it for that. But like, it does start to make me wonder, like, around the whole granting, like,
Right.
commission and granting model, sort of like, why do we constantly create these sort of similar structures where it can only operate when someone is able to give us a full business day's worth of time? And who are you not getting when you can't include voices because of, you know, people got to work and pay and take care of their families, and, you know, they got bills today and things. So anyway, just, it's interesting to me that that is something I thought was really just specific to DC and sort of the things I was hearing as being someone in DC, but it's actually quite prevalent. And I'm not saying anybody challenging it sort of in the way that you all are, or I'm not hearing about that in sort of other ways in other places. So
Because that's, I
Did
think to me, that's
you?
how it's supposed to work. It's
Yeah.
supposed to work like that so that they can
Mhm.
continue to keep getting those same money to the same fucking organizations that have $10+ million and $100 million in reserves. And they do terrible community work. They have no community service. They don't cater to the community that's here in DC. So they do that because that helps them perpetuate those same inequities over and over again. And they don't care.
Did you get compensated, Josh, for doing that?
No. I've never been other than lunch. And then now that it's virtual, like, there is absolutely no compensation, right? Like, I couldn't even get my box lunch. So I was a little bit mad. Yeah, no, that's real. And on top of that, like, it's already frustrating, the process, but then when I actually sit down to review things, the actual sort of process for applicants usually is just like, we're gonna have you go through 75 hoops, and we're gonna then like ask you to, like, you know, backflip 3 times and write a long form essay and then sing me a song, and then maybe I'll consider giving you some money, right? And so, like, it's just fascinating, that whole process, and how as we're really busy interrogating so many other systems and industries and fields, that we haven't yet, like, collectively as a community been like, this is all a problem. Right? Like, this has really got to be gutted, and let's start it all over again.
I think it was most disappointing for me and revealing, especially during this pandemic, and seeing how many people don't want to help people, like, with money that's not theirs. That was the part that was so just crazy making. I can't think of it, but we would be on these calls to talk about relief funding or possible relief funding, and just, we would text each other like, we've never met people who don't want to help people, who are so adamant against helping people, for just or helping people in the easiest possible way. It was like, they would probably argue that they are trying to help people, but, you know, having this application process, having to go through these hoops, and the DC, it was like every state got rid of their criteria for assisting artists, other than just, you know, you have to be an artist and you have to show that you're an artist. No real other questions asked, right? You didn't have to show tax documents, or, you know, maybe someone had to show some kind of loss or some kind of letter of loss or something, but not even really. And we weren't talking huge amounts of money, just a couple $1,000s, you know, which I'm not sneezing at. It's not an insignificant amount of money, but you would think the way people were defending this money, it was like tens of thousands of dollars or something. And it was very distressing, especially since we're supposed to be supporting artists, like people. There was a lot of organizations over people kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't want to transition us. So, so we want to. I mean, the commission is probably going to wrap into a lot of the conversation about your work too, Cece. But what do you think is like the most pressing issue when it comes to arts and culture right now? So you've been in the field for a while now. Like, what do you think is the change? Like, what do we need to change? What do you think is pivotal for us at this point in the new world? What do we see as paramount to the field?
Oh gosh. I think my first answer, my pre-COVID answer, which I think still applies, is sort of financial transparency. I'm definitely a finance person. I think the money never lies. The numbers never lie. You can tell a lot about your priorities and your health of an organization based on your money, or how you spend it, how you communicate it, how transparent you are. If you're not doing anything untoward or shady, then you can put it all out there. I think it's still important. Um, you see a lot of organizations not really making it because they haven't put sort of the financial health of their organization, they haven't made it a priority. Um, as far as, I mean, I also think it's important to be transparent and clear about your missions too. I think there's a lot of performance right now around equity, diversity, inclusion, all of these, buzzwords that we use, but I don't see a lot of places really um A, understanding what that work really entails, and B, having the will to do the hard work. I think a lot of people just think we're going to hire a bunch of people of color and that will be that. Um I think that's something that's really got to change too. Like, people need to have real seats at the table and make real decisions, and be honest about where they are in the process. I think there's a lot of organizations who have a lot of work to do, but recognize that they have work to do and are doing the work. And I think that there's a lot of like purity tests happening, like, oh, because everyone's there's no diversity now, therefore they just can't change, or they're doomed. And I think that's also not the case. I think just be honest about where you are, or where you're coming from. um, and I, just not to keep bringing it back to the commission, but like, we had a meeting where people couldn't even define what equity is, or their definition of equity was equality or inclusion. Like, they don't actually understand what it means to be an equitable organization. um, and that feels like it has to be step one. um, I do want to shout out, like, I sit on the board of the Washington Improv Theater, and I have to shout them out if any of them are listening, or if anybody. I mean, I think because I sit on a board that is just such a high functioning board, but also is on trying to be on the forefront, or to be a leader in all of this work. Like, there was a sexual harassment policy there was a anti-racism task force. That was the other thing. Like, we were having a conversation about, especially after the protests, after the murder of George Floyd, like, what are we going to do as an organization? We built in a lot of that work into the board. The board, if you look, is very diverse. We have more women. We have a woman majority board. Um, and we had people just saying, it's one thing to be equitable and inclusive, and it's another to be actively anti-racist. And we wanted to be clear that that's the work that we wanted to be doing, and that we wanted to amplify Black voices specifically and support Black women. I mean, just like calling it out, and not just being performative about it, or not just, I learned the term virtue signaling, like, not doing that. But they also recognize, like, the staff currently is all white, and they're very aware of it, and but that's where we are. The board is very diverse. The people that they serve are very diverse, but the staff currently is not. There's work to be done. We just acknowledge it, and we're going to do the work. But I think a lot of people just get stuck there, and it's like, well, we can't do the work because, this is where we are. And I think that's not, it's kind of a cop out. um
I think so in the entire history of art according, I have to bump back a little bit. Nobody has ever said financial transparency as a challenge, and I think that is, or as an important part of the work. And I think that's so important because you're so right, and that the money like you can look at the money and see what people's priorities are and what the health of an organization is. So before we go back to what I think was really great stuff you were saying at the sort of end of that, what, for those who might be listening who, fingers crossed, are leading organizations or who are or have impact and influential sort of like power and privilege inside of organizations, what does financial transparency look like, or what, and for you, what do you think that looks like from an equity perspective?
Well, so for personally, for an organization, I think it's really important to have a strong treasurer or a strong financial person in the organization. So even if that person is not necessarily the treasurer, like it's important to have someone who understands money and budget, um, and or to have an ED if it's a small staff. You know, I think I understand why a lot of organizations or museums hire people with MBAs, um, or have like COOs or CFOs, because um, you really have to be sustainable, and money sustains you. I think it's, you know, I think when we get into the arts or when we talk about arts, it sounds very corporate, it sounds very cold, but your mission and your passion only goes so far if you have no resources to spread your mission or to share your resources or to put on whatever programming that you have. And so I think it's important to um, have someone in the organization or find resources. I mean, there are a lot of resources that help nonprofits with finances, with budgets. Um, and I think just being transparent about being really honest about where you're spending your money and what your priorities are for the organization. Um, Conflicts of interest often revolve around money. And sometimes a conflict of interest isn't necessarily bad if it's revealed, you know, if it's known. Like I used to work for an organization where we paid one of our board members' daughters to do some mailing for us. And it was a known conflict of interest, but it was an important relationship to maintain or to foster because the board member raised millions of dollars over the course of many years for the organization. And I think the fact that it was transparent, everybody who came on board, everybody, it was known, it was identified. Like in theory, it's one of those like, oh, this is a conflict of interest, it shouldn't be acceptable. But then, you know, there's what you should do, and then there's what you do, you know, the reality of every organization. And sometimes you have to foster those organizations, foster those relationships, excuse me. And if you need the work done anyway, you know, I'm not saying like have conflicts of interest. I'm just saying like be transparent about it. Like it could have been easily just not disclosed and not known. And then, you know, anybody coming along would be like, wait a minute, so this is like being on the board is, you know, a jobs program for your family or something, you know, that's always a way it could be interpreted. But because it was very front and center, it was like, this is just how we are, because that relationship is important to foster, and the value that this individual brings to the organization outweighs any complication that this conflict might bring. That's just like one example, but sometimes you have to do that. Like sometimes you just have to uh, you have to make these decisions. Um, I think having a financial review, you know, a lot of organizations have to be audited, but not necessarily. Like it is very expensive to be audited, but you can have a financial review. I think it's important, even if it's every couple of years, um, to have a third party. I mean, if you have to file your taxes anyway, you might as well have them do a financial review. It just keeps people honest. Um, and yeah, I think it's, you know, it's, as Quanice was saying, capitalism is everywhere. And so until we figure out a way to fund arts and to fund all of these programs without money, like you have to be clear about, it's all of it. It's like, from, we've talked about, or AAC's advocated for like disclosing salaries, like all of that is part of of equity work. Like you have to be clear about what your finances are. You have to be clear about what you're spending your money on. You have to be smart about, there's always organizations who spend 30% of their budget or 50% of their budget on personnel. And it's like, how is this sustainable, or how is this possible? And you can do it, but you're not going to be around for for too long unless you have someone who's consistently able to fund that person. There's just best practices. And I also think in terms of equity, I say this a lot, especially on the commission, right? Like, it's one thing in foundations or in philanthropy, because in the end, that's people's individual money. And as much as we hope that people are mindful of being fair and all of that, like, you can't tell people how to spend their money. So how people want to support the arts, in what capacity, ultimately it's their individual decision. I feel that it's really important though and that's why it's really frustrating to be on a commission, because that's a governing body. That's a Quanice and I we pay and Josh, if you live in the district, like, our taxes go into supporting these groups. Like, if there's nowhere else that you're going to have equitable distribution of funding, like, it should be from the city, right? Where we all are paying taxes, where we're all we have skin in the game. Like, we are the residents who are making these decisions. We are supporting artists who live in the city. It is a little bit, it's an ongoing debate, and one I don't know why we're not a merit-based, why we're not a need-based funding group. Not to take away from like the merit, but like we have, individuals competing with $200 million organizations for the same sort of small pot of money. Like, that seems that the inequity is just baked into it. And if there's anywhere else, if there's any place where we can get rid of that, it should be in an organization where the money comes from the people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's something critical in what you said, right? Talking about financial transparency. We know that there's a certain structure that nonprofits are supposed to look like, but from what it sounds, the work that you do with Washington Improv Group, like, you all adapt to make it fit for your organization. I think there's a lot of arts organizations that don't necessarily adapt. Like, they're strict in what they want to do, right? They're strict in Robert's rules. They're strict in this law. And then even on the commission, they're strict. Well, they're not really strict. They're just really quick to like throw stuff on the mayor, which is technically not fair. But they try to say, well, we can't do this because the mayor did this, or we can't do this because this law, and they make that up. I'll just let y'all know. If y'all in DC, they make that shit up. And so, but there's a adaptability that organizations need to have, right, so that these structures can work best for that organization and the communities that they're serving. But people always want to be so like top down, Robert's rules, top down, this is what the bylaws say. I probably talked about this last time, but AAC is not a funding organization at all. When COVID happened, we realized artists, arts administrators, arts leaders, anybody who works in the arts right now are hurting. So we have to like step up and try to find ways to rob Peter to pay Paul. And so we became a funder. Like, we grant money to folks. AAC probably had like a $50,000 budget to begin with. Like, we had a very small budget. But then when we started raising money for other people, we started bringing in like almost $250,000. But it's like, that's not the work that we're doing, but we understand the needs of our community at that point in time. And so we adapted. And so when I brought that up to a large institution that Josh works for, they try to tell me, they try to tell me that they're not a funder. Well, bitch, we're not a funder either. But we had to do what we had to do to take care of the people that we need to take care of, right? Like, I just don't, when people tell me that they can't do something, I don't believe them. Like, I'm like, you can do it, you just choose not to.
Right. Where there's a will, I mean, that adage holds true, right? Where there's a will, there's people find a way.
It's true. I mean, like, and that's like, we're like a volunteer-led organization too. Like nobody's getting paid on our end. So like, um, and that's a level of work that luckily Quanice, I mean, adds to her already very full plate in addition to a couple of other folks. But like, yeah, that's why wouldn't we? I guess is the
Right.
question, right? So it's just really interesting to know that you're like you said, like this is taxpayer money. Like that's a whole different game, right? Is like why like there you shouldn't even ask the question why wouldn't we? It should just be like, okay, let's go into like response mode and make sure that our folks are good. And so that's those kinds of things, and the COVID in particular, and a global pandemic really starts to highlight the cracks in the foundation in that way. And so that's what I'm really curious around when we move through this or whatever's on the other side of this. Like it's just going to look so drastically different because those cracks are really, really, really apparent right now. And like, what are the eventually some of those foundations are just going to crumble. So, and people are watching, right? People are watching and seeing like what you are and aren't doing. So, mm, um, I forgot where we are in this damn interview. um, I mean, some of this has already, I guess, been addressed, but I guess I'm really interested in what this last question is, because we talked a lot about challenges that you might face as a advocate for this kind of work. But what kind of wisdom on the other end of that do you have for this sort of next generation of leaders who are right now, like, hanging out at home, working from home, or like, trying to
Right.
finish their degrees and things? Like what wisdom do you have as folks start to enter the arts and culture field now of all times?
I think the first thing I want to say that sort of advocacy, activist, this work wasn't something that I uh, came to naturally. I just want to be transparent about that. I think I found myself in the embroiled in these spaces, and I think so with any kind of work, any kind of deconstructing of systems or ideas, like you have to first look within to see how what you've been socialized to know, like kind of decolonize. We talk about decolonizing organizations, but I think for me it was like decolonizing maybe my own mind, or recognizing where I was upholding um, certain systems or certain ideas, not um, not purposely or consciously. I think it's a humbling experience, but I think it's also really important, having grace, not just with myself, but other people for whom this isn't something that came naturally or were even aware. I mean, I think it's been a sort of a journey in awareness, self-awareness, and just awareness in uh, the spaces that you occupy, and um, before you can it's like I want to be very intentional about my advocacy and in the work that I do, and representing. I Quanice knows, like, I'm pretty camera shy, and I don't, you know I've been much more visible because we were at an event for the commissioners, and I was asked to like interview and or give some comments, and I just kind of, I wasn't in it for the notoriety or the glory or anything like that. And it was my partner James who was like, you need to be out there, like people need to see you, um see that you're an Asian woman, like with a seat at this table and do in this space, and there are going to be people behind you. And so that's why I do. I mean, not because I'm like comfortable necessarily, but I think in the discomfort I know that it's really important. It's important for people to see um like themselves in the people that are making decisions. So that's kind of the first part of that question. As far as I thought a lot about, it's kind of weird even being in a place now where I'm asked like what I would say to younger people, or because I'm still trying to learn, like I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to gain wisdom from people who have more experience. And so to be in a place where you have a little bit of experience now and people are asking you, the first thing I thought of was that the best investment you can make is always in yourself. So whatever that is, if it's, I'm a strong proponent for therapy. So whether it's therapy, whether it's learning a skill, whatever that skill may be, I think I would really advocate for like technology skills right now for young people. Whether it's learning a language, whether it's, I mean, we can't travel right now, but well, unless you're, Quanice knows where you can travel to right now, but a lot of places are not accepting our passports, but one day, hopefully. But yeah, I think, we still live in a culture where, your value is, people place value on you based on how you can be appealing to other people. And there's still this huge emphasis on how you can please others. And not as much emphasis on like being your own person, or being, I'm speaking kind of to the women, but I think it absolutely applies to men as well. But just figuring out who you are, figuring out what your value is, figuring out where you excel, what your passions are, like not waiting for other people. I think that was a lesson that was instilled in me very early on, and something that I've held true to even through my career and in my personal life. Like if there's an opportunity to learn, you should always take it. No one can ever take away your knowledge from you, or your degrees, or your skills, like whatever they are.
Paid too much money for that degree. I'm like, it's mine.
I mean, I'm still paying. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the degrees are really expensive, so I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, but and then with that, I think my other thing, I'm big on boundaries lately. Like I think that's a huge part of, we live in a culture, I think especially in America, where it's like the more you work, it's like a badge of honor to not sleep. It's a badge of honor to like work 80-hour weeks. And then everybody's just like miserable and sick and angry all the time, so it's like, it's important to have boundaries from everything. So
That's awesome.
figuring out what those are.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
Folks out here listening, because you dropped some gems today. Awesome. So thank you so much for participating in our interview. And we're going to transition into our Know Better, Do Better.
You go first, Quanice.
Oh no, I don't know if I can.
Why can't you?
I'm just frustrated with everybody. Everybody gets to fuck on my nerves. So like, my Know Better, Do Better for arts organizations is basically stop wasting our time. A lot of you have put out these statements. A lot of you have claimed that you are for equity, like the commission. A lot of you have claimed that you understand that BIPOC lives matter, Black lives matter. But a lot of you are still doing the same old shit. And so my Know Better, Do Better is to stop wasting our time. You're either for us or you're in the way. Get out of the way if you know that you're not ready for this type of work. Like I'm really frustrated at this point because there's so many arts organizations that are like coming out with like all of these amazing statements. And then like Josh's article, like we are hiring this one, and then we have the data for this one, and then da 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 da. And nobody's really doing fucking nothing because the field is still the same. So the field's been the same since multiculturalism. The systems haven't changed. Like none of that shit has changed. And so like, either you're going to do the work or you're going to be in our way and we're just going to push you the fuck out the way. And then eventually survival of the fittest, right? Like we're going to keep doing our work. And if you're not fitting in with what's supposed to be morally right, ethically right, and working with making sure that Black folks, Indigenous folks, and people of color are uplifted and highlighted at your organizations, like we're going to just leave you out to the side and you're going to end up like time is going to take care of you. So yeah, that's my know better, do better is arts organizations. If you ain't down for the get down, get the hell out of our way.
It's interesting because I feel like both my know better, do better and my upcoming sort of the Let's Get Liberated feel like they've already been, like the seeds have been planted in the conversation so far, which is really awesome. But I wrote that folks need to keep the same energy. I wrote that I actually was sort of like, I don't really journal, but I was realizing in my writing that we are for a little over 4 months since the murder of George Floyd. We are also like decades and centuries into the brutalization of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in this country. So I think like it's interesting George Floyd being sort of this moment for folks, and I'm like, yes, but the list of things and the like since the dawn of time in this country. But anyway, but using George Floyd and that and his murder at the hands of police as a pivotal moment where folks decided they were going to start releasing statements and all these other kinds of things. Now is the time to take an inventory check here and sort of understand, what have you done? Are you still moving with the same energy that you were moving with in May? Like, white guilt is real. In the wake of George Floyd, the emergency, I'm gonna just be honest, the emergency fund that we're running for arts leaders of color, the donations were coming in like crazy, right? People were using their guilt as a means to push those pocketbooks and swipe those cards in support of BIPOC organizations, BIPOC benefiting organizations. And so we are now in October. We should be keeping the same energy that we're keeping. That's not necessarily specific to finance. Sure, that's giving is a regular way that you can support, but thinking about a lot of these folks who have released statements saying that they're committed to doing X, Y, and Z, we're at a point right now where you need to understand, have you fulfilled those commitments? Where are you on a journey towards fulfilling those commitments? Did you even make a commitment, or were you just saying a thing to say a thing? If so, it's time to start moving towards commitments and action plans. I think people don't realize people are noticing what is and what isn't happening. And some people are really vocal and getting called out, which is great. But then there's a lot of folks who are just silently choosing to move away, and they will never come back, right? Like, they are never going to come back to your organization. They're never going to come back and fill a seat in your space. And so I think, people thought they had a diversity problem before. I think there's going to be something really interesting on the other side of a pandemic, because the unique circumstance of what's happening right now is we're in the middle of a global health pandemic, but we're also simultaneously doing this sort of conversation and reckoning with race in this country. And so when a new normal emerges at the end of this, like, did you do the due diligence of like carrying everyone with you through that process, through what's happening right now? So when theaters reopen, when venues reopen, when it's time to ask people to come and purchase tickets to come back to your thing in whatever way, shape, or form, who's going to be left? Like, who's going to be left if it didn't look diverse inside of your auditorium before, and you didn't keep the same energy that you've been carrying since May? Then I'm pretty sure I would put money on it that it's going to look less diverse on the other end of this. So folks really have to, I think, sort of take now as a moment to do an audit, to do an inventory check, to understand if what they said they were going to do, they've done. So it's all about keeping the momentum.
Can I say something real quick? Because I just like the fact that when George Floyd died at the end of May-ish, he was killed at the end of May. The fact that one incident in 2020 is what people decided was the end of it, right? Like, people are like, I can't believe that happened. This shit has been happening for 400 plus fucking years on Turtle Island, right? Like, indigenous people have been here, they've been killed, they've been raped, they've been, communities have been sacked and pillaged. And like, this shit has been happening for 400 years in that one incident, because I think it was because they said it was because it was on TV. I don't know what the reason was, but I don't understand how white people just all of a sudden that just snapped to them that this is happening. Like, that bothers me a little bit. But I can't deal with that now. We're going to deal with what they do in the future. So as long as they're doing what they need to do and they're reckoning with what's happening in the past. No.
Very
even,
important.
yeah, talking about that, even just in the context of police brutality and not like the history of brutality. I'm from LA. So Rodney King was 1991 too. Like I remember this vividly. I remember the riots. I remember being sent home early from school. Like, if history is long, memories are short. I don't know, but it's kind of like for a lot of people, George Floyd was like the first time it was in your face, uh, a man being murdered by the police. But for a lot of people, it was not. If talking about Rodney King and then just taking it back, like I think what I wanted to add on to Josh's point is that for a lot of people, they're kind of finally, whatever was the reason, whatever the cause, have finally woken up to the reality of this country. Everybody's always like, this isn't America, this isn't America. And it's like, what America are you living in? That this isn't, like, it was founded on brutality. Like like we are a nation built on, violence against, the indigenous people of color, all of that. So I think for people for whom this is like, okay, now ready to be a part of the solution, I guess my know better, do better is that just because you're sort of new to you're new to it, like you have to acknowledge that you're new to it, that it's not new. I can't really say it any better than that. And
No, that
so
was perfect.
I think for me, especially when you want to like practice what you preach a little bit, it's knowing when to just listen, knowing when your experience isn't relevant. Wanting to do better doesn't mean just saying you want to do better. And I think that's true for a lot of people. It's like they feel like there's no shortage of people telling you what we should be doing and what the right thing to do is. It's just a matter of like, do we want to stop and listen? Do we want to acknowledge? I go back to the whole idea of just knowing where you are, having some grace about it, and say, you know what, I wasn't on board, but now I am, and now I'm here to listen, now I'm here to do the work. Or we as an organization, we're not with it, but we want to get with it, and we recognize this is where we are and we have to move forward. But the whole like, it's not actually a problem, or it's just some people's problem, like that is, you're just a barrier.
Yep.
Yep. I tried to give benefit of the doubt. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Because usually I don't give a fucking benefit of the doubt.
I was surprised. I was like, "Oh, Quanice is giving benefit of the doubt today. What is in the glass?"
Yeah. No, I mean, I get it. Like some people are like, ignorance is not a defense, and while I believe that, it's just like if we approach that too, like if that is what we're going with, that there's a lot of ignorance out there. So if we're just gonna say, well, that's no excuse, then we aren't getting anywhere either.
Yep. If I could blow up the phrase that you said on a billboard around, you're new to this. This is not new. like that is what it is, right? Is
Yeah.
folks have a tough time because in saying that they have to acknowledge that they've been either completely ignorant or they've chosen to look away.
Right.
And so that is tough for a lot of people, I think. So.
Yeah.
And it's systemic because nobody educated I mean, I had an amazing education, and my education in this realm, it was not what it should have been. And so a lot of people are not, the education in this country of our history is woefully lacking in a lot of things, but especially in our history of like how we treat, how books still say that slaves did chores, or that some of them were treated well. I mean, it just, we don't educate children, and And then they grow up to be adults.
Mm-hmm.
And then you tell them like what you've been taught is wrong and you've been complicit in this system of brutality, and nobody wants to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, that, yes to that part, but then also, if they haven't been educated in schools, they've been educated at home in a certain way.
Right.
So
Exactly.
whatever they learn at home and they become an adult, they don't necessarily, they like don't necessarily think what they're doing is wrong. Like that shit is embedded because it's, you know how that goes.
Yeah.
So teaching that hate is often passed down too. So yeah. Some folks know what they do and they just choose to ignore it. So like what Josh said, you're either ignorant, but you're ignorant and complicit,
Yeah.
or you're, what was the other part? You said you're ignorant, or
you've chosen to just
or you've
disregard
chosen to ignore it, but you've
You're like
chosen to ignore it and be complicit. So like it's you're both complicit in both of the ways.
Right.
So
Right. Mm-mm.
cool. So let's get liberated.
We want to talk about what this little, I mean, this is like our closing thing, right? So this is like, we vented, now we sort of impart the good things, the touchy-feely things, the what people should be doing, the actions and such. Do you want me to go first? You want to go first? Who wants to go first?
I want to go first.
Cece, go
for
it.
I have a couple of things. I vote. Please, people vote. I think it's a function of oppression to not vote, or to tell you to not vote, or to convince you that your vote doesn't matter. It matters. We think about the sea change in politics that happened in the 90s with the Tea Party. Like they were effective not because the president or the Congress or whatever, like they started from the bottom up. And I think that's what we have to remember. Like you need to vote for your city council. You need to vote for the people who control the budget for the police. You need to vote for school boards. You need to vote for the people who choose the judges. You need to vote. You know, it's like everybody knows the president, but nobody knows their city councilman. It matters. I'm not a pundit, so everything that's been said eloquently about this especially this election, you got to vote. It's important. It's two old white dudes, but it's like you still gotta vote. Like it's whether you I think that's important. I think it's 100 million people didn't vote last time who were eligible. We have to remember that 66 and 65 million people split the vote between the two candidates, and then 100 million people did not vote. So that's real.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is a one-off though, because I know Jehovah's Witnesses don't vote. So I wonder how much of that 100 million they like are accounted for, or if they don't account for that 100 million.
I think it was, so if it's, okay, so there's 330 million people. So if it's 65 plus 66, that's like 130 something plus 100, that's 230 million people. And that's 100 million people that I mean, there's people who are not eligible to vote, right? Like the people under 18, people who've committed crimes, which, side note, BS. Like if you've served your time, that may be another podcast, but ugh. So I think they counted for the people who just don't vote.
Okay.
But Jehovah's Witnesses are still technically eligible. But how many of them are there really? Like, I think they're not necessarily like the group that we need to worry. Like if all of them.
Oh yeah, I know. I just
would it swing the election? I don't know. I mean, if it would, we need to get them to vote. But
yeah. I mean, I know that they probably wouldn't swing the election, but I've always wondered that religious groups that don't participate and vote, like how much of an effect would that have on the election?
Yeah. I also don't understand that, because unless those people are going to, denounce their, social services, or if they're not going to partake in any sort of government assistance, like you can't have it both ways. You can't be like, I'm not going to participate in the political process, but I'm going to benefit from the result of it. Like I find that a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, I don't want to get into the realms of religion because I don't. I know that gets
I
really
mean, not just
complicated.
religion, but any group, they don't want to vote, but
Yeah,
want to complain about how, you know, the country is.
yeah.
I'm
True.
so excited because I'm I'm voting in North Carolina. I've been in North Carolina for since the pandemic. So not to say that DC is not important. I was glad to be voting in DC before, but
Mhm.
in a state like North Carolina right now, I just am very so to tag on to that, like if you can vote somewhere that's a swing state, I would love for you to figure out how to make that happen.
Right.
So yeah.
Register if you've been quarantining for 6 months. Some states that counts as residents for the year.
Yep.
Yep.
In North Carolina, I just had to live here for 30 days and I was considered a resident. So
Oh,
like,
wow.
I just wonder because I mean, we've seen this and we're still seeing this, especially in cities like New York and all these other kinds of sort of major metropolitan areas where everybody's from somewhere else, is that a lot of young people in particular have been leaving those places and going home to hang out with family, you
Mhm.
know, whatever. And I'm just like crossing my fingers, hoping that everybody who's doing that has sort of situated themselves in a way to either be able to vote back where they were living or to be able to like move their vote to where they currently are, you know, in alignment with whatever kind of rules and sort of laws and stuff. But that was a point of confusion for me, even like figuring out where am I voting and how can I do it to make sure that it counts, you know, was a bit of research I had to do, but I'm very glad that I did.
Yeah. So not just vote for president, but like down ballot.
Yeah.
All
Yep.
of the down ballot stuff is just as important.
Yep. Every year.
Yep.
Every year. Cool. Josh, what's your Let's Get Liberated?
So mine is it's like a myriad of things wrapped into a bunch of things, whatever. It's and which is telling because I wrote down that it's messy to get out of mess. And
Mhm.
so I think that I think it's interesting the number of organizations or a lot of what leadership looks like in the field, how surprised they are that it's like complicated and complex and messy trying to sort of like maneuver through like racial justice work or a pandemic or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, it's a hot mess and it's been that way for a long time. And so of course it's going to be messy trying to get out of it. So my Let's Get Liberated is really around leaning all the way in to the messiness because that's the only way that we kind of can move through it. I think it's maybe human nature that when we notice something's it's not human nature to sort of run towards the craziness and the mess and the whatever. Um, but I think it's the only way we'll sort of see something change on the other end. And so that's sort of my, I think, broad kind of message around sort of moving through and moving towards liberation. But I think I had a bit of an aha moment recently around how organizations are like sort of, you know, the sum of their parts, right? And so oftentimes we think about changing those parts and thinking about those parts as policies and procedures and systems, but we oftentimes don't think about the people that make up those parts as well. And so I think as folks are moving through equity and inclusion work inside of their organizations, if they're not highlighting the individual journeys that people need to be able to go on to move themselves and their experiences towards justice-oriented sort of thinking, that how can we assume that policies and structures are going to do it for us? And so that oftentimes means that's double the work, quadruple the work probably. But if we aren't pushing people to interrogate how they show up inside of organizations, in addition to changing, you know, board makeup and all these other kinds of things, I don't think we'll ever get to where we really want to get to. So yeah, and I just want to underscore one more thing, which is what Cece was saying earlier around setting boundaries. And so speaking specifically to BIPOC identifying folks, it's really important at this point because a lot of us are sitting at home, sitting with the work intimately in a way that we weren't before in an office. It's time to really set some boundaries, set some goals, take stock of where you are and evaluate sort of like where you are and what do you have to deal with and what are you being paid and are you worth what you're being paid? Like, you know, is your worth exponentially more than what's coming into your bank account every month? And then figuring out like what to do with that. We say know when to walk away a lot of times on this podcast, and so I think it's important, especially now, to also do that. And then also, I just want to say everybody should watch Lovecraft Country. That's my that's my also like opportunity for liberation. It liberates me every week.
Offline, we have to talk. I don't know what I watch every week. I watch the show and I'm like, what did I just watch?
I keep hoping that one day it's gonna like all make sense at the end of it. But even in the small doses that make no, like that they're just so vastly different each episode, I still find something that's like, wow, like it's just that kind of moving show, I think, in that way. But yeah, largely I don't know what the hell's going on.
Awesome. All right, so my Let's Get Liberated is to Black folks, Indigenous folks, and other people of color. Just get rest. A couple of weeks ago, I held a 1 hour it was an hour of no power session. And so I like created a Facebook event, and I like blocked off an hour, and then people like signed up, and I set up like this Zoom call, and I had relaxing music, and I was just like, here's some things you could do during this hour. And there was a lot of people who came through. It was like at least like 12 to 15 people who came through, and they were just like, I needed this time to lay down. I needed this time to like focus, or like to not be focused on my work. I needed this time to like just take a break. So along the lines of what you were talking about with creating boundaries, Josh, just rest. Please find time to rest. Rest is a part of the liberation work that we're moving towards. So please, we need you all in this fight, honestly. So please try to get the rest your body needs. Please drink water.
Take naps, honey. Take those naps.
Naps are hard. So I try to rest, like I try to sleep, but naps are really hard for me. I can't really do naps.
What's the organization? It's like a nap.
Oh, the Nap Ministry.
Nap Ministry, yeah.
Yeah. So get water, eat your vegetables, rest, get some sunlight, because they always say Black and brown folks are low in vitamin D. Go outside and get that sun as long as it's out here for now until the winter comes. Do what you need to do to get that fresh air. Just take care of yourself, because we need you right now and in the coming generations. I don't know.
What I really want folks to do is, I was in a session one time around self-care, and we have really commercialized what self-care is in a way that like revolves around getting your like manicure, pedicure, like eating the food you really shouldn't be eating, like these kinds of things. To tack on to that, Quanice, I think it's really important to understand what self-care really is. And it's about like, you know, a deeper sort of like movement towards self that I think asks and demands a lot more, but is infinitely more beneficial to people. And so hopefully that's part of that, because that manifests as rest or as naps or whatever, for sure. But it's like this big circle of all of those things, you know?
Right. And then rest will also be, oh, sorry, what did you say, Cece?
I was saying it's like wellness. It's sometimes it's been like co-opted, and it's become this like hallmark of privilege to have like self-care look a certain way. And so I think when we say it, we really mean like self-care, whatever that looks like for you, even if it just means going outside for 15, it doesn't have to be this complicated thing, just whatever you need to keep your peace.
Right. And self-care could even be leaving the country. I joined the Facebook.
Tell us.
I joined a Facebook group called the Blexit. I think they call it Blexit, Black Exit. So there's a lot of people who are actually leaving America, who are going to move abroad. So that's their self-care. They're taking care of themselves. They no longer can take what's happening in the country. But then I took a personal vacation in July to Aruba. I had to get guarded up, had the gloves, had the face shield. I bought goggles too, so I didn't want nobody's eye juice getting on me. And then I had 2 masks on for the entire trip. That was like a 5-hour flight. And so I went to Aruba because I needed to get the fuck out of America. Like I still actually right now need to get the fuck out of America. So I got a visa to Barbados, and I'm planning to leave for a year in April 2021, because I just need to get out of here. Every time I stopped watching the news. So that's a form of my self-care. I can't watch the news anymore. The only thing I get is like Facebook that might pop up, or like Twitter, or like Apple News. It might pop up on my computer or my phone. But other than that, I don't watch regular news. I can't do it. I need to get up out of here. I'm frustrated. Like, I just don't like being here. So I just need to go. Some people need to go forever. Some people need to go temporarily. I'm going to take it temporarily for now. But if you're one of those people who actually just like, I want to move to Mexico for the rest of my life, do it. I encourage you to do it. So take care of yourself. Woo!
And that's that, right?
Yeah, I think that's it.
I mean, we should see. Do people have questions? I know that, like, I've kind of been monitoring. I don't think
Yeah,
there's been some like
are there any
affirmations on Facebook that people have shared, which is great. So
yeah, people have been participating on Facebook. Does anybody have any questions on Facebook? And we could ask either myself, Josh, or Cece. Or if anybody in the attendees list, because there's a couple of folks in the attendees webinar with us too.
Which webinar? Oh.
Oh, thank you, Derek.
Oh,
Thank you, Derek.
I just like to talk shit. I don't really, you know. I need to get paid to talk shit.
Oh, that's the dream, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Who gets paid to talk shit in real life? Sports announcers.
Andy Cohen.
Andy Cohen.
Wendy Williams.
Oh yeah, Wendy Williams
Yeah.
is a good one.
Yeah.
the Breakfast Club.
The Breakfast Club.
Breakfast Club. Yep. Okay, so we need to figure that out. We need to get paid to talk shit.
Yeah.
We could be our own little breakfast club.
Right. We just need somebody to put us on air every single day. Like.
Awesome. All right. Well, I don't see any questions in the Facebook chat. But thank you, Derek, for saying your comment. Thank you for sharing that. So special thanks to Cece. Thank you so much for joining us, Cece. You're amazing for being this month. Is it this month's Social Justice Warrior in Action?
This summer's whole ass.
Okay, this summer's. And so season 3 of Art Accordingly is coming back. I think we're coming back this is officially like the first episode of season 3.
Oh.
Is it?
I think so, isn't it?
Okay, it is.
I want to talk season 3.
Yeah, I think you kicked off season 3. So then we're going to start having monthly episodes beginning in November, where we have a few amazing guests that are lined up. Arts Administrators of Color is having our annual convening November 7th and 8th. Yes. Please, please, please register. We're actually getting ready to release a lot of our session information. It's gonna go by hot fire. That's what it's gonna be. Once y'all see these sessions that we got lined up. So I'm really excited about that. November 7th and 8th, check out our website, www.aacnetwork.org. Are there any other thoughts or events?
It's all virtual, right?
All virtual.
It's all virtual. And I think that should have been a whole conversation is around virtual conference pricing, because I'm over it. But ours is really, I hope, affordably priced. But if it isn't for you, then just send us an email and we'll talk about it, because we want people there. We're good on the coins, so we just need to make sure we get as many folks there to consume all the really awesome stuff. So hopefully people will come out.
We have over 25 breakout sessions. We have wellness workshops throughout. We also have 3 plenaries. So it's really exciting. It's really big this year. And so we're hoping that we can get everybody, all the arts leaders of color around the country or beyond the country, internationally too. Mm-hmm. So please register. We look forward to seeing you there. It's going to be a great experience, even though it's virtual. We're still going to try to have the same family reunion feel that we always had every year.
Yep.
Cool.
Cool. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you all for joining us.
Until
Bye.